Hello, everyone. I'm Pia Renada, and welcome to Rappler Talk. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Guido David, who is a mathematics professor with the University of the Philippines and also a fellow at OCTA Research Group. Today, we're going to discuss his reaction to the president's decision last night to downgrade Metro Manila, four regions, Pangasinan and Albay, and Davao City, from MECQ to GCQ. Just to give a little background, Dr. David was part of the group who warned about the fact that it might be too premature or too early to downgrade Metro Manila to GCQ because of the data that they saw on the increase in cases. So welcome, Dr. David. Thank you for joining us.
Yes. Hi, Pia, and thank you for having me. And of course, first and foremost, I'd like to I'd like to clarify that I'm speaking on behalf of our research team. This is composed of University of the Philippines faculty and some alumni. Mainly, it's a group name. It's Professor Ranjit Rai with the political science, and then si Patricia Obtulas, a research associate, and then we have several contributors. Of course, I want to also clarify that this is not the position of the University of the Philippines. We're just a group of researchers doing research on the models and the numbers of COVID-19 cases in the Philippines. So regarding your question, we did recommend an extension of MECQ. I think our position is a little more conservative than the government, but at the same time, we do recognize that the government takes into account several different factors, including economic factors, the health factors, livelihood factors, and then the pandemic itself. Now, we're just looking at the one factor, which is the pandemic, and we're using basically we're basing our studies on standards used by the World Health Organization and some other countries like the United States and South Korea for classifying whether a region is possibly a high-risk region or a medium risk or a low risk. So we use actually four categories. So there's a safe region, low risk, medium risk, and high risk. And based on our studies, we feel that NCR is still medium to high risk, but on the conservative side, we went with high risk. Davao City was also classified high risk. Cebu City is actually classified as medium risk because although they had a surge in number of cases, the number of cases have been going down very quickly. I mean, the decrease was large. So we could say that, in effect, if you're talking about flattening the curve, then Cebu City has flattened the curve. We hope that it doesn't surge back, but it seems like the trend is very good for Cebu City and Pandaw City. For Davao City, the trend has been increasing. They have been getting more new cases. So it actually hasn't flattened. That's why we also recommended MECQ possibly for Davao City. And then for NCR, NCR is a bit tricky because depending on the data that you're looking at, it could seem like it's flattening or it could seem like it's not. So when we calculate the reproduction number, which we call the R, or which we denote by R, so the reproduction number gives us a sense of the pandemic, of how fast it is spreading. And if R is greater than 1, then the pandemic is spreading. If it's less than 1, pandemic is slowing down. And generally, if it's less than 1, we could say that the curve has flattened. So now it's a clear model actually. So we just take the data, we calculate the R. The question is the type of data that we use, and this is, I think, part of where some of the problem is, because there's a natural lag in the data, which means that when people get tested, they don't get their results quickly. It doesn't take 1 day. Sometimes it takes 4 days, 3 to 4 days. Sometimes it takes even longer than that, maybe even up to 2 weeks. And so there's a real-time issue here that the numbers that we have do not represent possibly the actual numbers. There could be more coming in later. And there was also an issue with the data lag, which I can explain later if you want me to talk about it. But just to answer your first question, we do support the decision of the government. It's a difficult decision. We only look at one parameter or one aspect, which is the numbers. And they try to balance economic factors, health facilities, availability of health facilities, and then the numbers aspect. And they made this decision. So we fully support the government. So moving forward, this is still a community quarantine. There's just more mobility for workers and employees. So we still have to practice our health standards, our health safety measures, social distancing, wearing face mask, and all those.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just digging more into the data you got on Metro Manila. So you were talking about specific cities, and you were saying that in the past, from May 19 to May 25, you observed differences in the decrease or increase per city. So like, for example, in your study, you said Makati, Las Piñas, and Pasay had the largest week-to-week increase, while there were decreases in Mandaluyong, Marikina, Pasig, Quezon City, and San Juan. So what does this mean for people? Does this mean that despite the GCQ, certain cities must still have their guard up? And what does this mean for the cities with decreasing numbers? Does that mean that they've already flattened the curve or have at least gained some upper hand on the virus?
Yes. Yes, those are excellent points. And definitely, it could mean like that, that certain cities have already flattened the curve. However, there's a problem with the Metro Manila, and the problem is that the cities are highly connected, and as people say, it's almost impossible to segregate one section of Metro Manila. I mean, people, for example, I live in Quezon City, but I work in Pasig City or Makati. So there's a lot of traveling going on. I mean, people who go to school, for example, schools are closed, but that's another example of people going to other cities. Some cities are very, close by, so for some people, it's just a matter of, driving a short distance, you're in another city already. We did observe increases in the number of new cases in Makati, Las Piñas, and Pasay. There was also an increase in number of new cases in Manila and Muntinlupa and a few other cities. We're careful not to claim that this is due to relaxing from ECP to MECP. In fact, we don't have any knowledge of that yet. And that was part of the reason why we recommended an extension, because right now we only have about 1 week of, well, at that time, 1 week of data. By now, we're having maybe close to 2 weeks of data. So maybe it's a bit clearer now when we look at the numbers, like if there was an increase or a decrease. Now, with Metro Manila, there have been cities where the number of cases increased and decreased. But in the past, we did not see a clear trend. For example, a few weeks ago, Taguig was doing very well. And then some other cities, for example, even Pasig City was doing really well. Like if you look at their R, it's less than 1, so it looks like they flattened the curve. But then they had a surge, and now the number of cases are increasing also in Taguig and Pasig City. While some cities which were not doing well before, like Quezon City, it's now doing well. Now Quezon City had 2 successive weeks of decline. So there's no, the trends are not sustained. So it's like one city goes up, one city goes down. The net effect is generally that the number of cases have been more or less steady. I think they decreased just a little bit, but the decrease was not significant for us to recommend moving into uh, GCQ based on the numbers alone. And I have to remind people, and I always say this, that Manila is actually the city of Manila is the #1 most densely populated city in the world. It's more dense than Mumbai or Delhi or Dhaka. I mean, so especially for places which have a large number of people. And then not just Manila, but Pateros is #2, Mandaluyong is #3. In the top 10, the top 20, we have a lot of our LGUs. So the high density of these regions makes it more likely for the pandemic to spread more easily, because the pandemic, I mean, distance is proximity is a driver of the pandemic. So when people are close together, then there's a higher chance for people to contract the disease, the COVID-19. So that is one of the things we have to safeguard. I mean, so it's not like because other countries managed it or something like that, then we expect the same. Maybe our situation is a little bit more unique because, like I said, we are more more densely populated region. And that's why it's easier for us to recommend, let's say, GCQ to provinces because they're not so dense. And then, of course, based on their numbers, the numbers are going down. Right now, we only are really concerned about, the truth is we're really only concerned about NCR and Davao City. The other regions, I think they'll be okay. I mean, Cebu, we still have to make sure their numbers decrease. But the other regions, I think more or less are they're not going to have, any serious problems or resurgence. So we just need to make sure that there's no resurgence in Metro Manila. And that's what we'll be observing and monitoring for the next few weeks.
Okay. So talking now about people thinking that, June 1, it will be GCQ from the stricter form of quarantine. For example, so someone, if I'm a normal average citizen who just heard the president's decision and is looking forward to maybe having more freedom of movement next week, what do you want to tell those people? Like, should they still be cautious? What should they keep in mind when they contemplate leaving their homes because of the GCQ?
Yes, yeah, maybe we have a little bit more freedom, but this is, I think, as Secretary Rojas explained, that this is still a quarantine. So, and this is just, I mean, I think I understand where the government is coming from. They're trying to relax the quarantine gradually, so it's very gradual. So that's why before we just had ECQ. Suddenly now we have, I think, many versions. So we have MECQ. Yeah, MECQ, then GCQ, and even MGCQ, I think, something. And it may be confusing, but that just means that we're adding some more, a little more freedom, but not total freedom. I mean, I don't think we should. I mean, definitely we're not going to go out party, or hanging out in the bar. I don't think we have that much freedom yet. I don't know about the tourism traveling, if that will be okay, but the malls will be more open. I think more stores, establishments will be open, and when people go out, you still have to. I mean, aside from the personal safety issues, wearing masks and everything. I mean, we should still be careful because the virus is still out there. It's not contained. That's what I want to say. I mean, the numbers are still there. And most of the people are either mild or asymptomatic. I think up to 90% are mild or asymptomatic. So that means, well, mild people will have the fever, so they might not be allowed in establishments. But there will still be asymptomatics. And maybe the number of asymptomatics is also underreported. Maybe we don't know the exact number because they haven't been tested yet. So there is a real danger. And we just have to be careful. I mean, my position is, if you don't need to go somewhere, then maybe think twice about doing that. I mean, we just want to go there. I mean, if it's absolutely necessary, if we have to buy medicine, for example, or for example, wala na akong shirt na masuot, then I need to buy a shirt, then that shirt may be. But, generally we try to limit our movements from them. And especially in, if you're taking the public transportation, that would be a much, let's say, higher risk of spreading the disease. I mean, I know they'll try their best to do social distancing in public transportations, but there is still a risk. There's always a risk whenever you're near other people.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's the major difference with the GCQ category. Public transportation will resume for the first time in 2 months. So does your group have any recommendations about how we should resume public transportation, what we should be observing, for example, in trains, in jeeps, tricycles, or in buses?
Mm-hmm. Well, we don't have I think that would be the task of, well, maybe I'm sure there are several government bodies, the MMDA and the Department of Transportation or something. So we don't really have a recommendation about that. I think, ideally for me, I mean, just my personal opinion is that, of course, maybe you can have Grab. It would be one person in a Grab car, for example, and maybe have a plastic sheet that separates the passenger from the driver. That would be something. For buses, it's a little more difficult. For MRT, even if you maintain social distancing, I think I saw a template for doing that they did. So maybe one seat apart. I think that may lessen the transmission possibilities, but there will still be a risk of catching it from someone else. So of course, it's really important for us Filipinos to be working together on this. This is not just a responsibility of the leadership, the government, but also the citizenship, the people who are, us. And when we open up, when we go to GCQ, everybody becomes a frontliner. And we also have to practice discipline and be self-aware. Like if you feel like you have symptoms, then don't spread it or don't go out. Maybe just stay at home or something. Self-confined. So those are the things that I personally recommend. From a standpoint of forecasting, we haven't really done any models on transportation like that. But definitely what we do is we look at the trends. For example, if we go into GCQ, we'll look at the trends of how transmissions go up, and then we will use those trends to make forecasts. We can look at provinces which have transitioned to GCQ, but in their case, they have a low number of cases, so resurgence was not really going to be very likely in those places. So Metro Manila is going to be different once we go into GCQ. It's not going to be the same as provinces which have already been successfully into GCQ, because we still have a high number of cases compared with those provinces.
So with the most recent data you have, you're saying you still don't have enough to assess how the downgrading to MECQ affected the pandemic or the increase in cases. Is that right? For Metro Manila?
Yeah, we had about 1 week plus of data. It looked like there was an increase in number of cases in certain LGUs, like I mentioned earlier, Makati, Pasay, Pinas, Manila, Taguig, Lupa. But there was also a decrease in certain LGUs, like Quezon City. So the picture, well, at least the picture that we're seeing now is that it was about the same. And I think when we relaxed to MECQ, there was not a huge change. Maybe some stores opened up, but there was not a lot of stores open.
Mm-hmm.
Restaurants were still closed mainly. It was mostly for takeout. We didn't have the public transportation. So maybe it was, I mean, it's possible that it was more or less the same as ECQ in terms of transmission. So we didn't really see an increase. And I know people are alarmed because they hear in the news that there were like 300 new cases, or I think even 500. But when we looked at it, a lot of that is actually backlog data. So, I mean, for example, there was a new case yesterday, or it was reported as new, but it was actually a case back in April, and some of them are even back in March. So we had that kind of backlog.
Yeah, actually, I want to go to the data collection later on and how transparent the government is with the data. But just to press lang on the point of the downgrade, no, because Malacanang was saying yesterday that the reason why they find it justifiable to downgrade to GCQ is because according to Metro Manila data, the case doubling rate in that region has now become almost 1 month long, meaning it takes 1 month for cases to double in NCR. Is this accurate based on your group's study of the data?
Yes, we actually don't look at the case doubling rate. We use a different metric. And the reason we don't use the case doubling rate is because for me, it's not clear, what would be a good doubling rate. Is one not good or something? So what we use is the R, the reproduction number that I mentioned. So it's if it's less than 1, then it's generally good. But the R is also correlated with the case doubling rate. So if you have an R less than 1, then your doubling rate should be much longer as well. So there's a correlation. However, we don't, as far as the data that we're looking at, we don't really see that. I mean, when you say that the case doubling rate has grown to, let's say, 1 month, essentially what you're looking at is that, or what you're saying is that the number of new cases has slowed down. And the case doubling rate and the R are basically two measures of the acceleration or deceleration of the pandemic. Or in other words, how fast the pandemic is spreading or if it's slowing down. So we just look at the number of new cases and then, compared with the previous weeks, for example. So we haven't really seen a clear trend of a decrease. If there was a decrease, it was only slight and not significant. So that was maybe our position. Maybe there was a decrease, but it was only slight. And I think I mentioned that our position is, our metrics are a lot more conservative than what the government uses. So maybe it's understandable if when they use a different perspective that their position is a bit less conservative than our position. And I'm not saying our position is right. It's just that that's our model, and those are the standards that we use. It could be very conservative. So if they don't want to use that, then that's fine, because maybe they don't want to use that level of being conservative because they have to balance other factors. But just to answer your question, we didn't look at the case doubling rate, but it seems from our perspective that the number of new cases was not trending towards a decrease yet. And if ever there was a decrease, it was very small. And I think I also mentioned earlier that the number of cases in Metro Manila has been oscillating. So there has been no clear pattern. I mean, in fact, back in April or early May, and I was looking at it, it seems like the curve had already flattened. And in fact, we might have already reported that the curve had already flattened, but now I'm saying that it's not. So it could be that it flattened, but it still increased afterwards. So there is a problem there. It means that it's not yet sustained. And that is maybe our feeling, that to be on the conservative side, we want to see a decrease or maybe continued decrease. Let's say we extend for another 2 months, and then not 2 months, 2 weeks, but we see another, we see a continued trend of decreasing new cases.
Mhm.
then we can relax to GCQ. So that was our position.
So you're saying, just to be clear, you think the best metric for downgrading from GCQ to MGCQ is if there is a sustained decline in new cases for 2 weeks at least.
Yes, 2 weeks at least. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so going to the next part when we want to talk about testing, because your group also had recommendations on how much we should be testing, especially in the high risk areas of Metro Manila, Davao City, and such. So you were saying that we want to reach the level of Malaysia, which targeted 16,500 tests a day. And you were saying that for the high risk areas, NCR, Cebu City, and Davao City, we should be doing 8,400 tests per day. So how do you get this figure? And do you think that we're about to reach this level for those areas?
Yes, actually, that was a past article of Malaysia. It was back in April, so we were trying to reach those targets of 16,500 cases a day. So it was just prorated. So population of Malaysia is about 31 million. So if we look at NCR, which has a population of around 40 million, plus Cebu and Davao, that's around half of the 31 million. So if we're getting half of the 16,500 tests per day, then at least I won't say that's a great target level because other countries are doing much higher than that. But that's at least a reasonable target for now.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually reaching 8,000 tests per day. Our high point was about 11,000.
But that's nationwide. You're saying kasi 8,400 a day just for these cities, right?
Yes, that's nationwide, that's true. But based on the test centers that we look at, most of the other provinces have little, well, they don't do a lot of testing now, and if they do some testing, they don't get a lot of positives. For example, in Baguio City, they still do tests, but the number of positive test results is very low. So I would say that right now, majority of the 8,000 tests we conduct would be in NCR, Cebu. But I know part of that would still include Calabarzon and Central Luzon, maybe because they're very close to Metro Manila. If we are maybe more conservative, then we could add Calabarzon and Metro Manila, so that would be another, let's say another 30 million. So that if we prorate that, that means we need another, I don't know, 15,000, another 15,000 tests, I think. So yeah, I was thinking of that as like a minimum goal for testing. However, once we're opening up to GCQ or MGCQ or GCQ, then because of the public transportation and people going to work, what happens now is that essentially all of us become frontliners. So all the workers become frontliners because we're now exposing ourselves daily. I mean, maybe some people don't have to work every day. Some people don't, will be working from home. But we will need to test these people. And maybe it's not the burden of the government. Maybe it's partly the burden of the private sector, the companies, the employers who, if you have a small or medium business, you want to protect your employees, so you want to have them tested. If our working population is about 60%, then if population of Manila is 14 million, Metro Manila, then we have maybe about 9 million people that we need to get tested. So maybe we don't test all of them, but it depends on what percentage that we're testing. If we're testing, say, 10% of them, of the, let's say 8 million, so 10% is 800,000. Let's say um, well, 800,000, then that's still another 30,000 tests per day if you want to test them over a 1 month period. So we're really looking at, we should now be aiming for a higher target level than, the 8,000 that we targeted previously. And I think our testing capacity is now at around 30,000. That's the capacity. So it means we can do 30,000 tests per day. So, maybe 30,000 is doable. So, I mean, we shouldn't be satisfied with the levels that we are. I mean, I know it's a really, we laud the government for having increased the testing capacity. Before we had almost maybe zero or something. It's a very low number. And now we have 8,000 tests on average per day, and we have capacity of 30,000. But we might need those 30,000 when we put these people back to work, because we will need to test them.
Okay, so you're saying that obviously we can't afford to test every single citizen of Metro Manila or those other high-risk cities. But then how do we decide? How does the government decide who to test? Because previously they've been saying they do targeted testing of people who have come into contact with confirmed cases, people who are exhibiting severe symptoms. Do you think we should change our criteria a bit given the GCQ downgrade?
Well, I think it's that was okay. What the government is doing is expanded targeted testing, so they target certain individuals, high-risk individuals, people who have come into contact with known cases, and people who are frontliners. So that's okay from the government standpoint. But what I would like to clarify is that when we do open up to GCQ, then there will be maybe not 8 million workers in Metro Manila, but it could be more because some of them are coming from the Central Luzon and Calabarzon, and they work in Metro Manila. So, we could be looking at, let's say, 8 million workers who are now essentially frontliners, and now we also need to test them. Maybe it's not the burden of the government, because this will now be a burden of the private sector. But these will still need to be tested. So this will be part of our testing capacity. I mean, what that means is the private sector will be shouldering the cost. And,
actually, we're seeing that already. There are big companies who are paying for the testing of their employees, but because the government doesn't require this of companies, and obviously a lot of smaller businesses can't afford to do the testing, then it's back to the government. LGU or national government to do the testing of those employees who aren't lucky enough to be hired by these big rich companies. So how do we deal with this then when a lot of the employers can't afford and are not even required to have their employees tested?
Right, I understand. And yes, I was thinking, like probably white collar workers will likely get testing from the companies, but the blue collar works probably they might not get the testing privileges. The government will have to look into randomized testing in that case, because you can't, if they don't have the capability to test everyone. And let's say for example, I don't know how many employees will not get tested, but let's say for example 4 million will not get tested by the companies, 4 million workers. Then the government does not have to test everyone, but maybe they could test 10% on a random basis. Then they will just need to test 400,000. Now, if you ask me if 10% is good enough, of course, 100% is always better. But you can't, if you don't have the capability, then you just do what's the best available option, and that could be just randomized testing. I would call that something like randomized targeted testing. You're target testing, but you're also randomizing.
Okay, all right. Moving to the last point, when we talk about data, because in your study you talked about how the backlog in the DOH confirmed cases affected your projections, because you have to account for the confirmed, and then there's the additional non-confirmed but could be confirmed in the future. So can you just explain how this complicates the study and how this could complicate government policies on quarantine measures?
Yes, it does complicate the study, but yeah, well, data lag is, it's part of the system, and even data errors are, if you're a data analytics person, then you know that when you look at data, there's going to be some typos, some errors in data. So that's perfectly normal. We pointed it out because it's connected with the real-time issue. When we make a decision based on this data, but this data is not complete because there's a lag in data, then how can we make that decision? Of course, one way we can do that is to account for this data lag by essentially we can sort of predict based on the past that maybe I'm still missing 30% of my data, which is roughly what we were doing for a while. So we had data, but because of some data lag, we anticipate maybe an additional 30% of data will be lagged. So we can account for that in the model. So it's not really going to be a problem with the modeling, but we have to state that clearly in our assumptions. And some people will say, well, you're adding you're adding data that's not there. What if it's not really there? So, and that's a valid point. So, so then we can just say that, okay, then this will be the range. If there's some more data coming in, then this will be the projection. If we just take this data, then that's the projection. And you mentioned the confirmed cases and cases for validation. There's actually two kinds of data that we mentioned. One is the for validation, and this is part of the official count. And this was also, this was based on Department of Health data. So in the official count, for example, when we did this report, there were about, say, 6,000 plus COVID-19 cases in Metro Manila. Let's say 6,700, something. But there were 1,400 cases who were not yet validated, but they were already part of the official count. They were not validated. It just meant that they did not have a city. So this patient or this case is indicated as being in Metro Manila, but I don't know if that patient is in Quezon City or Manila or Taguig. So that's just a problem with dissecting the data on an LGU basis. But if we just look at the whole of Metro Manila, then that's not going to be a problem. Then we just say, okay, we take all these cases. So the other one is the data lag. And this was first reported in the Inquirer, I think. I'm not sure. I didn't see. This was just shown to me by someone, actually by Professor Rancher. And then we looked at it. So in the article, it says that there were 6,000 patients or cases that were not yet reported in the official count. And this was acknowledged by DOH as a data lag. So we looked at it, and of course, I think I mentioned earlier that data lag is normal in the process. I mean, we can't get rid of this data lag because it's normal. When we get ourselves tested, we don't get test results the day or next day. We may get it 4 days later. So this is normal. But when we look at it, what we saw was in the DOH data itself, the number of the official count, let's say, is 15,000. I think it's around 15,000 now. But they also have the test reports from the 36 test centers all over the Philippines. This includes RIPM, St. Luke's, National Institute of Health, UP Manila, PGH, etc. So these test centers return these test results, or at least the numbers, to DOH. And it returns how many tests they did in one day and then how many positive cases, how many negative. The positive cases are reported as positive individuals. Now, when you add all those tests, number of tests that they conducted, we get about, I think at that time, 270,000 tests conducted. And the number of positive cases or positive individuals was 22,000. So it means that 22,000 people got tested positive, but only 15,000 is in the official count. So that means there's a lag of 7,000. And I think the explanation of the Department of Health was that these were cases that they were still working on and they were still double checking. It is a tedious process, and we acknowledge that. So we're not saying this is anybody's fault. I mean, it's just that it takes a while. This is a cumbersome task. I mean, this is a lot of work. And what I think what they're doing is partly they're looking at these cases and they're checking if there's any duplication. Because, like I mentioned, these are positive individuals. So they should be unique individuals. But there's also a chance that, for example, if I got tested at RIPM, and I got tested in St. Luke's, and both were positive, but those were both reported by the two test centers, then I may be counted as two positives, but I'm just one person. So I think that's one of the things that they're looking for, or that they're verifying. So that's why there's a data lag. But as I heard, they're fixing their data lag. So I think they're working on it, the 7,000, they're reducing it. They do acknowledge the data lag, but they're working to reduce that. And that's also part of the reason why we're seeing a large number of cases lately. I think, I haven't checked the numbers yesterday.
539 cases.
Yeah, 500, but for example, the day before that was 380 or something. But not all those 380 were new cases yesterday or the other day.
Truly new cases.
But some were back in March. So this was part of the lag. So they're cleaning up their data lag. So now there were cases in April that just got confirmed, yes, the other day. So I wouldn't be surprised that, for example, the 500 new cases yesterday, maybe only less than 200 were actually yesterday's cases. The others were actually back in early May, in April, or even in March. So we don't have to be alarmed that we're getting a large number of new cases, because some of them are in the backlog. Only a part of them are actual new cases. So we do still tabulate which are the new cases, and we put that as part of our models so we can show if the trend is still increasing or decreasing, because we just add the new cases.
Okay, so I think that's about it. I guess what we're now preparing for is how to assess what this skewed downgrade will mean for the pandemic and for our citizens. So thank you so much, Dr. David, for sharing your expertise with us. And we look forward to your future studies on the pandemic and on the government response. So thank you everyone for watching. And yes, sir, any last words?
Yes, thank you, Pia. Sorry for cutting out. Yes, so we do these reports every week, and we share them every week. Even now that we're going to be moving into GCQ, we will still do updated reports, because we want to track the new cases, and at least we can see if there are emerging patterns and stuff that we should be concerned about. If there's like a second wave, for example, then all that. So thank you for having me as a resource person, and best of luck.
Okay, so thank you for watching. That's been Rappler Talk. And again, I'm Pia Renada, and we're going to continue watching the pandemic and, of course, listening to experts like Dr. David so we can better assess what this pandemic means for our country and how the government is responding to it. Thanks for watching.